introduce quite shortly, will speak for about 5 minutes about the different kinds of ways they're using software and the internet to be able to reach audiences. And then we'll have a Q&A discussion, which we hope will be a vigorous discussion amongst all of ourselves. Now, IGF is all about the civil society, the businesses, the tech communities, and the government's all trying to find common ground, and humanitarians are very familiar with having to work with all these stakeholders. But when we're talking about data and data action, again, some of the topics that are really timely across the board here at the IGF are really related to what our work is too. And if you read the daily reports from the Diplo Foundation, you'll see that there's a whole section today in the report, and Barbara can give that to you shortly after the session. There's a whole section in there about data privacy and how we can actually work. And so just to say that that's also online if you check Twitter, if you would like a non-dead tree version. Okay, so again, we'll have about 15 to 20 minutes of us sharing some information, and then we'll move on. So I'll start off with the far left, far right. We have, and yes, directions are fun, especially if you work with maps. We have Amir Hartato, who's from Petapachana. They just won an award yesterday for creating software to engage local communities. And so he'll share a little bit more about that and how they've worked in terms of crowdsourcing and involving communities. Next to him is Rania Erikasuzi, and she is the coordinator at the International Federation of Red Cross Red Crescent for the Federation-wide data bank and reporting system. And she'll talk about how 190 national societies are sharing data and information about their work and our activities. And then we have CJ Hendricks, who's from the Humanitarian Data Exchange as part of Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. And CJ is going to talk about that tool and some of the practices of how we're globally trying to share humanitarian data. So again, just to say, I'm very thankful that you're all here, and we will give you lots of space to talk and to ask questions. So we'll start off with Amir with a couple of comments about Petapachana.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I hope you are well. So my name is Amir. I'm from Petapachana.id. A little bit about Petapachana. So Petapachana is powered by Cognicity open source software. It's a free web-based platform that produces megacity scale visualizations of disaster using both crowdsourced reporting and government agency validations in real time. The platform harnesses social media and instant messaging during emergency events to gather confirm situational updates and also in a manner that removes the need of expensive and time-consuming data processing. And these verified user reports are integrated alongside the relevant emergency data. So since its debut, Petapachana.id has been used by millions of residents, users to make time-critical decisions about safety and navigations during emergency and flood events. It has been also adopted by the National Disaster Management Authority, or BNPB Indonesia, to monitor the flood events, and also improve response times and share time-critical emergency information with residents. If you would like to know more about Petapachana, you can visit me at Seed Alliance booth later this afternoon. But I would like to inform you why Petapachana has been so successful in Indonesia. So this is Indonesia. Next slide, please. So this is Indonesia demographics. I know there are still some gaps, but however, it's predicted that the internet users will be increased by 30% in 2022. When our team developed Petapachana.id, we realized that crowdsourcing via social media and instant messaging has a potential to become a powerful tool for collecting and sharing information. And as Harlan Hale, of the regional advisor from USAID, said, information is the most important resources in the disasters. And at Petapachana.id, we try to open the access of information and make them available for everyone. However, like many other crowdsourcing initiatives, Petapachana.id works because of community participations. Next. Can you press one more? Yeah. So, however, again, crowdsourcing tools heavily rely on the use of mobile devices and the internet. Particular demographics, like disabled people, senior, may have problems with their lack of familiarity of using mobile devices and the internet, which just results in digital divide. You might heard a lot of that word since yesterday. Okay, but today I'm going to share from my experience on some ways to improve community participations in crowdsourcing. So based on my, I will tell you a story based on my previous experience in the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. But however, mostly I'm taking examples from my work at petabencana.id. So please enter. There you go. So first is localizations of data and materials. When I was working with OpenStreetMap in Indonesia, translating materials into local languages is important, as most crowdsourcing tools and materials were still in English. But when our team started translating tools and materials into Indonesians, we received a lot of inputs about the language used. Some people also proposing to translate materials into the other local languages. For your information, there are about more than 1,000 local languages in Indonesia, according to Statistics Agency. But at Petabencana ID, we trying to localize the information as well, and we actively working in localization of our materials, not just by words, but also we're using other materials like GIFs and memes as well. And community engagement is very important as well. At Petabencana ID, we're working with the range of different communities from government, NGOs, and also academics. For examples like Ciliwung River Institute, Urban Forum Consortium, and local universities. Through our activities like workshops, seminars, we value their inputs to improve our tools, so it adapted with the users, it adapted to them. There are many ways to do community engagements, and I will show you one of the examples later. And still part of community engagements, it's also useful to have a local community hub. Trying to have a local champion that interests with the crowdsourced data can be very helpful, especially if you live in the country with more than 16,000 islands. So if someone from far away wanted to have a community engagement program, they don't need to contact people far away, but they can just contact their local hub. And again, also, most importantly, provide better crowdsourcing tools. At petabencana.id, we're not making redundant reporting apps. Instead, we're trying to work together with the range of different apps out there and integrate the information into one place as a web platform. And we also design our user interface so it's so intuitive, so it's easy for understand and more usable for everyone. Next. This is one of the examples of community engagements that we did a couple of weeks ago. Thank you for the IGF awards we used this, the funding from the awards to do this trick art mural thing. So it's very useful. We're not just telling them to contribute to petabencana.id, but we're also trying to educate people that by sharing flood information via available social media channel, they also help informing others and help reducing the risk. And government also able to monitor the situations and send appropriate response. Next. And this is our user interface. So basically, when they, for example, from Telegram, they just type /flood, and then they will get a link to add the reports, locations, flood height, and then more information, adding photos as well, and their report will show up on the map. Next. And because our tools work very intuitively and we keep the engagement with our community, we receive many reports from people. Early 2016, we received more than 6,000 reports, and between 20 to February 2017, we received more than 1,000 reports in 24 hours, and our website has more than 256,000 users in 24 hours. However, we still have some challenges like limitations, for example, expansions for people that doesn't have internet connections, and also applications in rural area. But yeah, that's all from me. Thank you very much, Heather.
Thanks, Amir. So 16,000 islands, thousands of languages. How do you engage people? Those are some really tough questions. And I think, how do we make decisions with all these different stakeholders and make sure there's continuity towards it to be able to help during emergency response? And this point around, I really enjoy this point around how do we collaborate across all these different languages and locations. And I really think that's the question that all of us have in humanitarian action, and that's just one country snapshot. I'll turn to Rania to give us a multiple country snapshot.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Rania. I work at the International Federation of Red Cross Red Crescent Societies, and I'm the coordinator for the federation-wide data bank and reporting system, which is a big platform for annual reporting from all Red Cross Red Crescent national societies, and there are 190 at the moment. Next. Thank you. So FDRS, the acronym, It's a system really for transparency and accountability. It came and performance reporting for Red Cross and Red Crescent societies. It was a decision made by all national societies at the General Assembly in 2009, and it was introduced in the IFRC Constitution. So all national Red Cross, Red Crescent societies do report to that system. It's self-reported data. And we have a data set for 5 years so far. We disseminate globally all results of Red Cross, Red Crescent societies through different channels. So we do issue every couple of years a report called the Everyone Counts report, which we are planning to issue one next year in March or April 2018, there'll be a new Everyone Counts report that would analyze the data for all the past 5 years. And there will be a focus on the volunteering for the Red Cross and Red Crescent societies and the challenges and that we have seen within the past disasters as well. And we do have a web application that is continuously being updated with the data that we collect from national societies. So it's basically a knowledge sharing network about the national Red Cross, Red Crescent societies. And we have it in 4 languages, English, French, Spanish, and Arabic. Next, thank you. So the data, what is it? We have key indicators, key proxy indicators, we call them, because they do reflect the capacity and resources of the National Red Cross, Red Crescent societies, and also their reach, like how many people they reach. The main indicators are about the numbers of volunteers, so how many people are volunteering their time for the Red Cross, Red Crescent, how many staff are paid, how many people donate blood, the number of local units, which is really, we call them local units because we have, our Red Cross, Red Crescent societies are quite different. So some call them branches, some call them chapters, some call them, but it's really the different levels of offices across the country. So the offices that work closely with the communities. So we try to count all of these offices to see where we are in each country. Also, the total income and the total expenditure from each and every national society and the people reached. And we have, of course, subsets of indicators. These are the main indicators, the higher level ones, but there are subsets of indicators, like one about how many people are trained in first aid, because this is one of the biggest activities of the Red Cross, Red Crescent as well. All the data, we try to get it disaggregated by sex and age. Age was introduced only lately in 2016. And the people reached data is also disaggregated by type of program. So whether it was disaster response or it was a long-term development program, for example, or by type of service. Was it a health project? Was it a WASH? Was it livelihoods, shelter, migration, etc.? So we have an overview of each and every national society and what they have done in their country in the past years. Of course, reporting is not 100% complete. So national societies do report the minimum 7 main indicators, but then the disaggregation sometimes is more complex, and we can look at the challenges later about how this is happening. Next. So this is a snapshot from the website, and that's a map of, on the website where we actually publish our data. We have a map with a drop-down menu where you can select the indicator and see per country where we are on the map. The size of the bubble reflects the number. And we can have another view also is a table where you can actually see the trend over the past 5 years as well. Next. We do have also profiles for each and every national Red Cross, Red Crescent societies. This is also a snapshot, so actually we cannot scroll down, but for each indicators you can see on the screen the trend over the past years, whether they reported or not, with some also secondary data that we get from the World Bank indicators. Next. So how do we actually do the data collection, and how does it work? It starts at national level, actually at community level, with the national societies themselves, because it's self-reported data. They're the ones who provide that data to us. They collect it from the communities for each program or project in different ways. So they use mobiles for mobile data collection. They use surveys. They do surveys with communities. They do trainings, and that's how they collect their data. And then this data is consolidated at headquarters, submitted to headquarters in each country, and then consolidated and submitted to us in Geneva. The data in FDRS is public. So it's available for anybody to visit the website and see it and download it.
Public is not open?
Not open. No.
Why is it not open?
It can happen. Okay. I think we just because we're starting, we would like to engage with people and know what would they like to do with the data, but that's it really. And then when it comes to the global level and how we do that, so it has a global scale because we try to compile all the information. We do follow a rigorous standardization and harmonization process, and also a rigorous validation process for quality control and quality assessment. So in the data collection, for example, we have a big team of data analysts who are based in Geneva and in our different regional offices, who are in continuous communication with all Red Cross and Red Crescent societies. We have a standardized set of KPIs with standard definitions across regions, and so we use standard definitions to work around all the diversity of the different organizations, because Red Cross, Red Crescent societies are independent organizations who have their own ways of collecting data, their own ways, their own systems. So it's quite complex to find a standard system that would fulfill everybody's basic needs. We allow them also to either enter the data themselves online or offline to cater for the different internet and technology access and restrictions. We do some capacity analysis of our Red Cross, Red Crescent societies and identify gaps, and according to their data literacy levels, we can customize our technical support to them as well. And there are also, with my colleague actually, Heather, some wider data literacy efforts going around with all National Red Cross and Red Crescent societies to improve the quality of reporting. In our team in FDRS, we also follow up on a weekly basis with all of them to keep the communication and make sure that the data they have submitted is actually accurate. We make sure that they understand the definitions, and we triangulate the data, obviously, with different key documents. They also submit to us key documents, their annual reports, their financial statements, their strategic plans, which are also available to download. And we double check that the data in these documents does not contradict the data they sent to us. We look at the reporting periods. We look at different sources of data from the different disasters that happened and operations. So there's quite a long validation process that goes on before we actually publish the data on the website. It's very important for us because this is first and foremost for transparency and accountability towards the people we serve. For disaster response, it has proved to be quite useful because when a disaster hits in a country, the FDRS data is available, and our teams, operational teams, who are coming from Geneva or regional offices or other national societies who would be responding would have readily available data about a National Red Cross Red Crescent Society in the country. It's also very helpful in terms of movement, cooperation, and coordination. So how do we work together as a network of Red Cross, Red Crescent? And for research projects and further data analysis also, as I said earlier, the data sets are downloadable and can be used by everyone for more analysis. What we analyze and what we have on the website is little. What we analyze in our reports is a sample, but I think much more can be done with the data that we have. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rania. So open-ish, right? Happy? You know,
Open-ish.
well, this is a graduation, right? To be able to get to more open, and so you can download the data sets and use it for different action. I think what's really exciting about this particular project is that, you know, we're trying to standardize data workflows in a massive organization across different organizations, and that's a change. And I think just to think through how you go from one national society from one branch. Like Northern Nepal, I was in a branch and I watched their data collection process go through all the way up to the head branch, and they had a paper document. This is actually a way for us to make sure that it's online so that people can find it. So if you have the Nepal data, you could then take it and use it with our friends from HDX, who CJ will tell you a little bit more about, like, what is HDX and how does that work and how we potentially could use those different data sets together. Thank you.
So yeah, I want to tell you a little bit about our work and what we do, but I want to get there sort of by telling a story to illustrate the point. And first thing I'm going to do is show you a couple of ugly but useful maps. This is a map that we made when I was working for an organization that dealt with logistics in humanitarian crises. And this is a response to the 2005 Pakistan earthquake, which left about 3.5 million people homeless. And what this map shows simply is which roads are open and which roads are closed, as well as some information about security concerns. And we produce these maps every couple of days based on information that we got called in from our logistics officers talking to bus drivers at bus stops in all those little towns, not all, but several of those towns. And we produced these every couple of days, and it was determined what relief goods could be taken where, because the roads were opening and closing due to landslides constantly. We could do that, and we could produce that map really quickly. Every couple of days, we produced, I forget how many of these over the course of the response, because we could standardize, right? We could standardize data collection, and we could roll out forms to our teams. We could give them GPS devices. This was 2005, 2006, so no one had smartphones with GPSs in them at the time. So they were recording things mostly on paper, and that would go into Excel, and it could be pretty quickly turned into this map. It was a little slower at the beginning, but over the course of the first couple of weeks, we nailed down the procedures and so on. And we could do that because we had some degree, I'll say, of command and control, right? And so that got pretty standardized. Next slide, please. So because that information flow was working really well, we could then begin bringing information in from other organizations, in this case, OCHA, which is the organization I now work for, and bringing in their data and joining it to make more analytical decision support products. This product shows, the size of the circles shows how many people are expected to return to that place, people returning back to their homes, and how accessible those places are. So it gives some indication of like who has to walk a long way with a heavy load of relief goods to access their village. So this is the kind of analytical stuff we could invest in because the road condition data, that data flow was working pretty smoothly. So that was just looking at logistics. So we had a lot of control there because we were focused on a fairly narrow range of actors who are doing logistics work. And focused on a fairly narrow bit of content. Next slide, please. But now I work for OCHA, and it's a very different game because OCHA is the part of the UN that's responsible for coordinating across sort of all domains of humanitarian crises. And OCHA has a very different problem. In a way, it reminds me of what Rania was talking about, in that you've got all these different national societies in their case, but it's a fixed number of them. Whereas for us, with each crisis, there is a whole new set of actors, many of whom, little local NGOs, for example, or in some cases national governments, that may not have had contact with the international humanitarian system before. So you're sort of in the fog of war, if you will, of a humanitarian crisis, and you're trying to deal with all these people that have had no pre-event training, have had no contact with our standards and practices, and so on. These are the 5 pillars of our work, and information management is the part that I work in, but in fact, information management touches all these aspects. Next slide, please. So when I came to OCHA, we started thinking about, okay, how do we solve this problem? We have all this data coming in, most of it on spreadsheets, none of it standardized in any way. The spelling of place names, for example, is always different, and even the same actor will give you a new version of a data set each week, and then the place names will be spelled differently, within the same column of data. It's a nightmare. So the first thing that we came up with, we just need an exchange language, some kind of, initially we thought some sort of XML-based exchange language, something like that, to let people keep their existing data systems, but then add a little bit of information to sort of standardize it when they send it to us. That's where we started, and we started working on that. We built a prototype, but eventually we saw that really wasn't quite enough. That there was issues around how does data even get shared? Data gets built in these crises and then walks away on someone's laptop when they rotate out. So we needed a place even just to let data be visible and findable. So next slide, please. So we sort of expanded out. We said we've got this data standard, but we also need a place for this data to live, a place to sort of advocate for that standard, to give a place for people to have tools that use that standard, visualizations that are driven by that standard. So we started working on the Humanitarian Data Exchange about 4 years ago. And so that's essentially a platform, and I'll show you a couple of screenshots of that. Next slide, please. So it's basically an open platform for sharing humanitarian data. Our goals are to make data easy to find and easy to use for analysis. The easy to use for analysis part, that's where the standard comes in, right? If data is not standardized to some degree, it's not very interoperable, and therefore it's very difficult to use for analysis. And easy to find, that's just the job of the platform and tagging and search and so on. Next slide. So here's just a screenshot just to give you some concept of what it is. This is our current page for the Rohingya displacement crisis. There's some top line figures there. We often have some little graphs and things at the top, but what you can see just at the bottom there is the beginning of a search result, right? That's all the data sets that are somehow found by a search result for Rohingya. And that's really the core of what the platform is. It's a way to go and find data sets about a specific crisis or a specific country or a specific thematic area like education or nutrition. Next slide, please. So that was good, and we made a lot of progress with that, and it really helped promote this standard, Hexel. The adoption of that is expanding because of the platform. But in fact, we started running into the kinds of issues that are being discussed at IGF, which is issues around, privacy of information, security of information, data literacy. We need people in the field to have the capacity to use these data to make decisions, to understand visualizations of data and the limitations of data to make decisions. So now we've really zoomed out to something much larger, which is the Center for Humanitarian Data, which is a partnership between OCHA and the government of the Netherlands. That's actually opening this week in The Hague. And so it's got a much broader scope. And so now HDX, the platform, and Hexel, the humanitarian exchange language, are sort of components of, products of, the Center for Humanitarian Data. Next slide, please. So the 4 components of the Center for Humanitarian Data are data services. That includes the platform and the standard. Data literacy and training, and we've done some trainings in Dakar recently with our colleagues at IFRC, and we're planning some more of those. But also looking at data policy. How do we come up with policies that make sure we do a good job of protecting people when we share data, right? How do we deal with personally identifiable information? How do we deal with disclosure control, the concept of being able to identify people from a data set, even though there's no personally identifiable information in there, simply by sort of the process of elimination, which can be a problem in a lot of humanitarian data sets, which tend to be small. And of course, network engagement, right? You need to get a lot of partners on board for this thing to kind of have the critical mass to really succeed. Next slide. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, DJ. So congratulations on the data center opening up this week. We all need a place to be able to share and use data and understand that, but I think the conversations that we have around how do we do this properly is where we spend a lot of our time, well, each of these different platforms talk about the different ways that they demonstrate and use data in humanitarian action. I know that you'll have many questions and comments potentially about our individuals, which is great, and their products that they're talking about. In our conversation before we joined you here today, we came up with kind of 4 themes, and I just want to kind of highlight them for you, because I think we covered those, but we talked about them, and just to kind of summarize. So we think that local communities are involved directly in data use, and that really ties to the grand bargain. And the grand bargain is part of the agenda for humanity. Leave no one behind. That means local engagement, participatory revolution. And so for us, most of our action requires us to think through that. But we are as well humanitarians, which means that we need to do no harm. It means that we have to be mindful about our decisions and how we work. And so every day, it feels like every hour, and maybe it's part of my job, is how do we work in those workflows? And I know these are questions that Rania and I have, and that with the data center as well we have. So how do we involve local communities and be engaged and do it in a crowdsourcing way and use the internet? And we are here again at the Internet Governance Forum, and we need to modernize as humanitarians. How do we work within the digital divide to be able to reach people and use what they have to be able to inform the response and include them in that journey? What are some of the implementation tips and learnings and technology, and how do we standardize? And again, the kind of big topic is verification, validation, and how do we make sure that we're, again, causing no harm? So those are some of the themes that we came up with, but I know that we only have about 25 minutes to have some conversation, so I want to kind of take a moment here to open up the floor and see if you have questions or comments about some of the things that we talked about today. And when you do speak up, I'd ask you to speak a little bit louder just so that we can hear you. And it'd be great if you could tell us your name and the organization you're with, and why you're here. Thank you. So questions? Hi, welcome.
Thank you. I hope my voice is coming clear. Yes. So my name is Walid Al-Sakaf. I'm a senior lecturer at Södertörn University in Stockholm, and I teach journalism and media technology. And one of the interesting phenomena that we've seen lately is the proliferation of data sources online that journalists can extrapolate and get information from. One area that's been somewhat causing a lot of issues is emergencies, and journalists can't get right information from the sources, and oftentimes they lead to either exaggerations or understatements or issues that end up misinforming the public. And so one of the new, let's say, efforts that we've tried to push is open data for journalists through projects of the sort that you're working on. And one of the difficulty here is that you need to have some sort of standard method. And yes, each project has its own visualization methods. You can have various graphs, various tools, but none of them are pluggable directly to an open application interface that the public can reach to, such as the APIs that many news organizations provide. I don't know, maybe the United Nations has APIs that are in different contexts, not necessarily in humanitarian issues. And so this is becoming a sort of an opportunity that's being missed because data is there, it's in your databases, but then it's not reaching the public because of the lack of the interoperability. Yet the internet allows you to have this interoperability. And so how do you find the potential for this to become a reality, in that you provide platforms and look at the journalism community and ask them to extract this information and inform the public as the humanitarian situation evolves?
Thanks, Walid. I'll turn to Amir, perhaps. You want to give some comments? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the questions. It's really good questions. Yeah, at Peta Bencana, we actually have an open API, so everyone can plug in into our informations, to our real-time informations. One of the examples is that API from Peta Bencana is also being integrated with the national systems. It's called InAware, where people like you, journalists, everyone can check not just informations, not just flood information from Peta Bencana, but also other hazard or other disasters that been going on in the regions. So yeah, that's just one example of how we integrate the API into the national level, but maybe not yet in the international. But wait, yeah, it's possible. The API is there, but again, it's a challenge to find who interested with the information, with these informations, and how they're going to use it. It's still they're still trying to figure out, basically.
So I mean, I think we're trying very hard to get to that world, and I think we've made a lot of headway for certain kinds of figures, such as the number of displaced people in crises. We have data from UNHCR and from IOM, International Organization for Migration, on the site that has these hexal tags in it, this humanitarian exchange language in it, and that's accessible via API. There's still a long way to go, especially around other kinds of data, like the needs assessment surveys that are commonly done in the response to crises, to understand what needs are where, so that people can then respond to those. That data is less standardized. But again, the real difficulty comes from the fact that there are so many different actors, all of them sort of invested in their own system, even if that system is just a spreadsheet.
What you are doing as well.
Sorry?
Well, in principle, you are also creating new standards.
Yeah. Yeah, we tried.
It's the same as what the other people.
Well, no, they're generally not working to a standard. They just have sort of a format, typically, that they're using as a spreadsheet format often. So what we're trying to do is add a layer in there where at the point of sharing, where they just add this little bit of extra semantic knowledge that comes from these hexal tags that makes the data interoperable, more interoperable, let's say. It's a very lightweight standard, because we have tried in the past to build systems and kind of require everyone to share their data into this system with a strict schema and so on. And it fails, because people are in the middle of a crisis. They don't want to learn your system. They want to respond. So we're trying a very lightweight bit of standardization, but it does enable automated visualization and so on. So I think we are already to some degree in the world that you want to be in, but there's obviously more still to do.
There's also an opportunity, if I might, with the Center for Humanitarian Data opening, it gives you a chance to say that there's already partners with universities, so maybe we need to partner more with journalists to understand how we can work with them and other civil society groups, because I think that's the purpose of the center, is to try and bring all these different actors together. And when it comes to being able to tell a story, certainly that's part of data literacy, right? And so trying to meet journalists halfway, I think, is a good idea. I'm just going to turn to Brett next.
Hi, I'm Brett Solomon from Access Now. Thanks a lot for all the work that you're doing. It's fantastic in various different forms. So we've been tracking the issue of internet shutdowns over the last 4 or 5 years, and we're seeing an increase of disruptions to the network taking place, largely around moments of heightened political activity, but also in humanitarian crises. So, and in isolated places as well. So, for instance, shutdowns in refugee camps for the Rohingya, also a couple of cases in Jordan, in Jordan refugee camps. So I was just wondering, given data is becoming increasingly important or central to humanitarian response, are you seeing disruptions in the network, deliberate, intentional disruptions in the network? And if so, or even if not, are you thinking more broadly about how to ensure the openness of the network to ensure that data flows that you can collect and also can be reported and published to journalists, etc.?
Okay.
We'll start with Amir, please.
Thank you for the questions. It's very interesting. About the internet shutdown at the moment in Indonesia, we haven't have that issue. Instead, the government trying to expand the network to the rural area as well. And that can be said from the internet proliferations in Indonesia is quite huge, and also the social media use is quite huge. And also at the moment, our platform is very focused on the mega city or in the urban area at the moment, but we are trying to expand to the rural area. We still need to, it's still a challenge, with rural area, because I know some of the rural area, like this tool is great, but it only works in the mega city at the moment, because rural area has less people than urban area. So it's still kind of challenge, and it's still ongoing research at the moment. So thank you.
So for the IFRC's operations, usually we haven't had that issue yet, but since we've been operating in emergencies for some time already, we are relatively prepared in terms of working around not having internet connections, and we do have various ways and people on the ground and people not on the ground who communicate via either satellite phones or other types of technologies that may not require internet. Also, our data sets usually can be printed and downloaded and used on Excel and in computers. So, but there's something that we do need to think about a bit more for the future, for sure. Thank you very much for your question.
Yeah, our users are generally the people contributing data, at least, are the organizations working in the field typically, and so they often will come with their own internet connectivity, so the data sets do find their way to us. So I don't think that's impacting us sort of at our level, but I would imagine those kind of outages would affect people who are trying to use, for example, mobile devices to collect survey data, for example, which is increasingly common. We're seeing less and less sort of paper and pencil collection. So I would imagine it's an issue, but we don't really see it so much at our level.
I would just, thanks, I would just flag it, because I think that as as we become increasingly reliant, and you guys become increasingly reliant on connectivity in order to do your work, I think now we're seeing it sort of as part of the work, but in 5-10 years, it is going to be the absolute backbone. And the opponents, those, I mean, not necessarily in natural disasters, but in, in political, etc., environments and war and conflict and so on, those actors are going to be aware that the infrastructure is essential to your response, and those disruptions will very likely take place. Yeah.
Thank you, Brett. This is exactly why we're here. We need to join these communities, right? And this is, as humanitarians, we need to understand. And I've been at many discussions over the last week about cybersecurity issues and risks and that. I know Access Now is leading in that area. It's really important that we're there and we're learning. And I think there are some examples throughout the humanitarian action about people not having access to the internet that has caused issues. I can't name any off the top of my head, but I do know there are issues, and I know that we're working on different portions of it. But we are an institute, all of our institutions are trying to modernize and try and find a way to read it, and that's why we need to work with the IGF community to make that happen. So thank you so much. And Barbara, you said you had a question for us?
I do. I have a question related to relates maybe more to the perception of data. Data is often perceived to be objective and to be a better source of information than estimates, for example, related to journalism, as was already indicated. And then maybe this is a question for the HDX team here. How to ensure that the data and the analysis and the databases that are on HDX are sound and are accurately put together? Is there transparency on how these data sets come about? And have you had any issues in the past of data that was misleading or used in misleading ways?
My colleague Javier Terran is here as well, and he manages the sort of the content side, and he's pushed us very hard to focus on metadata, so that methodologies are documented. It's an uphill battle, to be honest, because especially in humanitarian crises, people are out there in the field, they're doing things quick and dirty very often. We just want them to be really open and honest about how quick and how dirty. But it's a great point, and to in terms of validation, we don't comb through databases and try to validate them. It's sort of beyond what a team of our size can do. What we do is we vet the organizations who want to share data on HDX. So we talk to them, we ask for samples of their data, we try to understand who they are. Many of them are very big actors, and we know them well. But there are a lot of smaller actors. We have about 330 organizations on HDX sharing data. And so we want to see what that data looks like and get a sense of them. So that's a little bit of quality control that we do. And then we monitor to some degree, to the extent we can, the metadata that we receive to be sure that the data is usable. So that's an ongoing battle.
I know in HDX you also have to add like a description to the data set to explain what the agency is of it and that. And I think that you also have that you also do spot checks for PII, like personal identifying
that's right,
information, right? When it comes to, I really enjoyed the question from Barbara from Diplo Foundation about validation and verification. I know Rania has spent quite a bit of time on that. Maybe perhaps you can talk about the good work. And we also have Ulta and Astrid, who I borrowed her time, thankfully, today to help us a little bit on that. Maybe you can talk a little bit about verification and how you guys make sure that you're giving good data.
So we triangulate data. We look at different sources of data and try to triangulate what's coming to us with what's available in other sources, in other databases, and online. We do basic Google searches sometimes to make sure that this does not contradict with whatever we have. We do some contextual analysis, so we analyze the context of the country, look at what disasters happened in that country, and does these numbers make sense to us when they are sent to us. So that's something that I think any data analyst does usually when you do receive data and before you need to use it or publish it or use it for analysis.
Wonderful. And Amir, oh, I had my mic on still. Amir, I know you guys have also worked on the complexity of how do you validate social media data?
Okay, this is very difficult because there's a lot of hoax or fake news going on, but until now, we are very grateful. There's 0 false reports so far because we're also trying to integrate the data from the government as well. So when the government see a flood reports on the websites, they also do validations by calling the local municipality agencies over there, like try to check is it flood or not, and they also can turn on the polygon orange, red, regardless the water level. So there's a verification process into that. And from social media and also local apps, because we're gathering a lot of applications, each applications, they have their own verification method. For example, from Clue, they have incentive methods, and they have, basically, they're collecting points to be exchanged into like certain data, not data, certain services or, profile and, and also, for example, and the other applications also, they have their own verification method. So most of the data that comes to us, not most, all of the data that comes to us are verified very well. And users can also verify with their own. If they see one report, but there's no more than one, it means maybe it's not flooded. It can be very doubt it's flooded. But if you can see a lot of points, a lot of reports, that means that area it's flooded. So yeah.
Thanks very much, and thanks, Barbara, for that question. We have about 5 more minutes or so before people come in and ask us to depart. So I wanted to see who else might have a question or a comment on these topics around it. So far we talked about perception of data, accuracy, validation, the risks and vulnerabilities, and what do we do about shutdown since we're becoming increasingly reliant on joining communities in the internet. And we've talked about how do we reach and be more open with journalists, and how can we make sure that they have that so they can tell the story in companionship or in criticism of humanitarian actions so that we can get better and we can improve. So those are just some of the questions that we did touch on so far, or comments. Just wondering if there are other questions here today or comments. Brett. Brett and I need to be on a panel.
No, I'm really, really interested in this topic because, as you say, like bringing together, I think the digital rights community with the humanitarian community is actually an increasingly important area given the increasing number of conflicts that we're seeing around the world. And I think as we, hopefully are not, descending into a period of, total conflict, but we need to be prepared for, I think we need to join forces. So, and it's certainly part of our priority areas, and are here to learn a lot. The question that I have actually is about security, data security and cyber security. And I think, again, in the same way as we're seeing disruption of the networks, we're also seeing intentional isolating and identification of vulnerabilities within databases and within collection mechanisms. And yeah, I'm just wondering, like, is there kind of a sector-wide approach to data security, and what kind of mechanisms, and this is a whole topic unto itself, but what kind of mechanisms are in place to ensure that the information which you have, which is really like life and death information, when collected and combined, you know, what sort of protections are in place for that?
I think
It might just be a comment more than a...
yeah, no, I think it's a really important question, and on this panel we have a lot of field experience, right? And maybe I'll start with Rania about some of the health projects you've worked on, and how do you work on security and making it better for that, and from a technology point of view, but also from working forward.
Okay, thanks, Heather. I'm actually not sure how to answer this question, to be honest. But in terms of, well, health data in particular is quite critical and sensitive, and we do need to protect it. And in the past, I mean, this discussion was not happening, even though even on paper, when you are collecting data on paper, you still do need to make sure that it's as safeguarded and protected and not distributed. So currently, at the moment, our health teams, for example, are conducting data protection needs assessments to look at this issue more in detail, because we do, when there are emergencies, for example, we do have field hospitals that are deployed even in normal situations, in longer term development projects. We do have some field hospitals. So we do have very sensitive data that is currently, so I know, for example, that they were working on some research to look at palm vein identification to make sure that any kind of personal identifying personal identifiers are not distributed. So we are working on it. We are not there yet, but we're working on it, and it's quite a priority for us at the moment. Also, my colleague Heather is working with the ICRC. I mean, they recently just launched the data protection guidelines. So that's something that we are using and disseminating and rolling out with our teams and with our Red Cross, Red Crescent national societies. Thanks.
I'm going to owe her coffee. So thank you. So I think the question around security and how we can improve, I think that's another thing that we can work on with this global community. And certainly we all have security experts or information experts within our different organizations, but I'm super mindful that we could probably spend a whole day just talking about this and working through it. But I am aware that there's another panel coming, and since I was so rigorous on helping the other panel end on time, I thought I should be appropriate as well. So just to say that we touched on a lot of different topics, everything from data protection to security to cyber security risks to vulnerability and internet shutdowns to accessing information. And these are just the icing, really. I think there's a lot more that can be done in terms of how we connect humanitarian action and data flows and decision making to reach the most vulnerable and to work with them. Now, data is as flat earth. It's only helpful if it can be used for information, if it can be used for decisions, if it can be used for knowledge and evidence, and that's a choice. But we need to make good choices on our data flows. And so I'll ask my colleagues just to give like a one-sentence takeaway on what you learned today and what you're going to do about it. Just one takeaway. You're welcome. I'm so mean.
You didn't tell me.
I got to keep it colorful.
You have to be spontaneous.
All right. Well, basically, data. I mean, you know, people have been collecting data. I know a lot of people, a lot of initiatives try to collecting data, but it's very important. It's very critical that data is not just about number and it's about statistics. It's about quantity. It's about people, and we need to take care of it. That's all.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think my point, and throughout the past few years that we've been working with data, I think what's important is also learning how to use the data, read the data, and take decisions accordingly. What's been happening really is we are very eager. We have all the technologies now, and we're using all kinds of technologies and tools to collect data, but we're not yet at the point of, we're starting, but it's still a long way to go until we actually use it in our decision making and policy development.
For years, we built systems that were, paper-based or that could work offline because connectivity was always so terrible in many of these field situations. And over the years, that's just gotten better and better. Every single year, it's just gotten better and better. But you've made me start thinking about that may be a liability as well, because then that infrastructure becomes a target. And if our systems are 100% dependent on it, what do we do? So that's a really interesting thing to think about.
So have a plan and then use it. Barbara. And again, Barbara's from Diplo Foundation, our sponsor here today.
Thank you, Heather. This discussion was very insightful. I just actually wanted to make a quick comment or an update on that this session is actually part of a track of different open forums from international organizations here in Geneva that are dealing with data. So if you want to know more about the others, we will have another open forum on environmental data with the WMO. There will be one on data for the SDGs with the UN office in Geneva, and well, you can find more in your program. We are also doing reporting from the sessions, including this one. So that's just an update that I wanted to give, and I also want to really thank the panelists and Heather, because I thought that this was a very insightful discussion. It touched on so many different aspects of data collection and data analysis and data sharing and the limitations of data sharing. So I thought it was very insightful. Thank you.
All right. So thanks, Barbara. And I just want to say thanks, Astrid, again for helping. I really appreciate that at the last minute, just getting some help. So thanks, everybody, for participating. And thanks to Amir, Rania, and CJ. And you can learn more about our work if you go to the schedule. In the schedule, we put their biographies and some of the work in the background and the links of their projects, so you can learn more there too. And we're here for the rest of the day for the most part. Thanks.